Hey, all my IFG friends, this is Steve. I want to say, if you like movies like I do, we've started a new podcast called Happy Hour Flicks. You can find it anywhere podcasts are found. It's all about nostalgic movies that we love, and we bring on special guests each episode, and we also have specialty cocktails made for each one, too. So it really is an hour of a good time talking about movies that we love, like Gremlins, Seven, Free Willy. We talk about The Last Starfighter also. I mean, we kind of run the gamut across all the decades and really have a great time. So wanted to invite you to come over and join us. That's Happy Hour Flicks, anywhere podcasts are found.
The producer called me one day. She's like, we're greenlit to shoot. That's the good news. And I said, oh, great. What's the bad news? And she goes, well, the executive at USA Networks thinks that your script is too clever for their audience. So they're having somebody in-house rewrite it to dumb it down.
That's crazy.
This is the
Independent
Filmmaker's Guide
from Framework Productions.
Framework
Productions.
On IFG, we talk about independent film from development through delivery. By featuring discussions with creators and collaborators about their experiences, we form a roadmap to help you have the most success with your projects. The horror genre has long been a cornerstone for independent films. Today, we speak with a writer whose love of and unique takes on the genre have helped him carve out his own place among horror films and fans, both in the past with the launch of the Final Destination franchise and into the present and future with his latest movie, Don't Look Back.
They always say that when you're writing a script, you're actually writing the script for the reader so that they can kind of get the story. So sometimes when you're writing stuff, you have to repeat things.
That's Jeffrey Reddick, best known for creating the Final Destination franchise, but he's a screenwriter, producer, and now first-time director for his feature film, Don't Look Back.
It's a very interesting story how I got into filmmaking.
And I'm your host, Stephen Pierce.
It started off when I was 14. I was just I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, so I was like this hillbilly in Eastern Kentucky, and I saw A Nightmare on Elm Street at the drive-in and flipped out over the movie. I loved horror films. And so I went home and I wrote a prequel idea for A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I called information and found out the name of the studio and the president, and I mailed it to him. And he sent it back because it was unsolicited. So I'm like, look, mister, I've spent like $3 on your movie, so I think you can take 5 minutes and read my story. And it was Bob Shea who ran New Line Cinema and founded New Line Cinema. So he read it and got back to me and thanked me for my aggressive introduction and gave me some pointers. And from 14 to 19, I stayed in touch with him and his assistant, Joy Mann. And, back in the day, this was back in the day. This was like 80s. I had wanted to be an actor. So I went to New York for the summer to study acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And when I was in New York, Bob, because I had this relationship with him and his assistant, Joy, they offered me an internship at New Line. And so I got an internship at New Line Cinema. The acting wasn't panning out well because this was by now it was late 80s, early 90s. And if you weren't white, then all the roles you could get were like drug dealer or pimp. And they're like, you look more like you're more like a Michael J. Fox type. And we just don't know what to do with you in acting. So I decided I was going to pursue writing because I knew I wanted to be in the business. So I stayed in New York and just stayed on at New Line Cinema and ended up working there for 11 years. And during that 11 years, I learned pretty much everything about the behind the scenes part of show business, which was really helpful creatively because I realized so many decisions weren't based on how good the script was. You'd get a really horrible script in with, Jim Carrey attached, and then you get a great script in from somebody that was a new writer, and they would go with the Jim Carrey script, because it is a business. So I learned early on to kind of separate my ego from the writing process so that I still get bummed if there are certain jobs I don't get, but I don't get crushed. Like I know a lot of my writer friends who have moved to LA to be in the business. They just don't know how the business works. So if they get one rejection, they're like, devastated. And I kind of have learned that level of not taking things personally. But I've just kind of evolved with the business. It's when I wrote Bob Shea back then, that was VHS, and there were no DVDs. There was no emailing people or following them on Twitter. It's like I had to type something and mail it in the mail, which is crazy.
Right.
So I've just learned to evolve with the business over time. And so as I've gotten older, I've wanted to have more control. So I've started producing more, just directed my first feature. Again, I think that's kind of the key, no matter what area of the business you want to work in, is seeing what the landscape is, because the landscape is changing now so much. The theatrical part of the business has changed a lot because if you look at what the studios are doing, they're doing sequels, remakes, things that are based on worldwide best-selling books. Because the studios, if you look at them, the people that run them now, a lot of them are business people. Like I saw that transition because, Bob Shea, when he created New Line Cinema, was a film lover. Like he loved film. He was just like a filmmaker. He wanted to get his stuff out there. He was showing film like John Waters films and other films at like campuses across the United States. Like he was just doing things very differently just to get films seen. And then Nightmare on Elm Street really put the company on the map as far as a force,
Right.
They call it the house that Freddie built, and it really was the studio that Nightmare on Elm Street made. But then I saw, they brought in like a businessman who's very, very smart, but he was very focused on the business side of stuff to run New Line. And you see that happening across studios everywhere. It's like business people making the decisions now, as opposed to creatives. So, any business is looking at the bottom line. And so that's why you see studios like taking safe bets on, we'll make sequels, or we'll do remakes, or we'll find a book that has an audience already.
Does that affect how you approach, and did that affect how you approach your creation of the content you're pitching and that you're making?
Not really, because they would still take chances on things. Like, I mean, back in the New Line was really a kind of a maverick studio. I mean, they made, Blade when everybody was like, who would want to see a black superhero movie?
Right.
Sorry, Black Panther. But they made Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's like, who's good? When the business people were like, well, who's going to go see a movie about turtles? And the math. So they would take chances on movies that a lot of places wouldn't. But for me, especially with horror is kind of the genre that never goes away, and it's finally getting the respect it deserves, kind of still. But it's still, back then it was kind of looked as, it was like the porn of films. It's like, well, yeah, people watch it and they enjoy it and get off on it, but it's not art.
Right. It's not artistic. It's
not artistic.
Yeah.
But it never goes, there's always an audience for that genre, and the horror fans are very faithful. But for me, I mean, certainly if I'm producing something, I look at trying to attach either a production company or an element that I think is going to help put it above, the rest of the heap. It's always concept. They want something that they can kind of sell.
Mm-hmm. What is the saying? Like the same but different. That Blake Snyder uses. Yeah.
So it's like Final Destination. I mean, I had a hard time at New Line with that one, and I worked there because they were like, well, we don't understand how you can have death as a killer. Like, you can't see it and you can't fight it. I'm like, that's the point.
That's what makes it thrilling and engaging.
Yeah. And they were still very nervous about it. And, they wanted at some point to like make it a kind of a Grim Reaper monster. And luckily when James Wong and Lynn Morgan came on, they were like, no, we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that it's like, you don't see it. And they actually came up with the whole Rube Goldberg idea. But to your question though, because I worked at New Line, everybody thinks, oh, you work at a studio, you have a special in there. You do, but the only problem is a lot of the employees that worked there were writers. So, you're always still going to be like, oh, that's the kid from Kentucky that Bob Shea, enjoyed, brought
definitely
in.
I mean, definitely understand that feeling. I mean, sometimes it feels harder to go vertical because you kind of get slotted in where you function in those large machines. And sometimes I think it can be hard to get out of that and say, hey, I actually want to be doing this.
Yeah. Because everybody, a lot of people would take jobs at studios as a stepping stone to get to like, and the studios know that. So they're, so I actually went to some producers who had a deal at New Line through a friend of mine who was working with them, and got producers attached before I brought the project to New Line.
So you kind of went out to get in.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, because I had submitted stuff directly, and I had stuff that got good coverage and, made it to Weekend Read, but, just didn't get pushed over the top. So I'm like, I got to try something different on this one. So I went with producers who had a deal there.
So you went out and you partnered up, you came up with the idea and you wrote the script, and then you partnered up with some producers you'd kind of known outside, like surrounding, that had a deal with New Line, and then they helped you get in to pitch it at a higher level.
Well, I wrote a treatment back in the good old days. You could actually sell a treatment.
Wow.
So I wrote like a 12-page treatment. My friend Chris Bender worked for Craig Perry and Warren Zide, who also produced the American Pie franchise.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, they created like a big horror franchise and a big comedy franchise. And, I worked on it with them a little bit, and then we'd take it to New Line, and New Line would give us notes. At first, all the characters were adults that didn't know each other. And then Scream came out, and then they're like, let's make them teenagers. I'm like, okay, fine. So I made them teenagers. I want to stay creatively true to my stuff, but I'm also very collaborative because, if you want to be like you want to be an auteur, you almost have to produce and direct your own project first. If you want to, I can't change anything. So, but they kept coming back with the death thing. And finally, I remember Craig and Warren said, well, if you guys pass on it again, we're going to take it to Miramax. And they're like, we'll buy it.
Wow.
Yeah. Because it was good. It was a really good idea. And
obviously it's been 5 films total.
Yeah. Yeah.
That obviously wasn't a discussion whenever you're making the first movie, right? How did the process go were they looking for something they could merchandise that large and package and be like, this could be, a huge franchise for us?
Well, New Line was always very much about a brand. So they would make some one-off movies, but they always wanted because they obviously, with Nightmare on Elm Street, they learned very early,
right.
You want to, even Bob had made them reshoot the ending of Nightmare so that to open it up for a sequel. But I'd always thought of it as if it got made, I mean, I didn't think it was going to do as well as it did, but I always had plans to do another one. So that was definitely always in my scheme of thinking. So I kind of had the story for the second one in my head before we did the first one. Even I just didn't write it out. So they were always looking for something that could be a franchisable for sure.
And so how did it go? What was it like making that first film? Because at that point, I mean, you were kind of unproven. You were then moving, I guess. Did you leave the studio and go full time into writing?
No, I did not. I did not do that's the funny thing is I'm like, yep, I should have moved to LA after the first one, but I'm kind of a creature of habit, and I love New Line and working there. So I decided to stay in New York because I'm like, oh, this is easy. I can just write in New York and just sell stuff and don't have to ever leave. And then it wasn't until I sold the story for the second one where my boss, I'd worked with Bob Friedman for the last 5 years there, who was the head of marketing and television. He's talking to me. He's like, Jeff, I love you, but it's time for you to leave the nest, brother. You're a writer now. And I was like, okay. So the making the first one was very surreal because I was in New York. And obviously all the creative stuff was, going on in Los Angeles. So I'd come out for some meetings, but I basically, since Bob, was bi-coastal, they would just send me every update, send me castings notice. They just kind of kept me involved. And, I went out to set and shot a cameo. So it was fun, but there was a kind of a disconnect because I was still working a full-time job.
Right. That's interesting, man. That's really interesting. I never thought about it.
It's kind of weird. I'm kind of weird like that. I should have just quit and moved out to LA but I think I would have been I always joke because I moved to LA after 9/11. I quit New Line, but after 9/11, I'm like, okay, I think it's time to go to Los Angeles. And I got sober once I got out here. So I think part of me thinks it's probably good that I did what I did, because otherwise I would have probably come out here and been one of those douchebags who's like, I've got a movie and rah, rah, and then, drinking and doing coke, or I never did coke, but just drinking and partying all the time like an idiot. So I think it worked out for the best in the long run. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. I didn't sell it. And then like everybody else I knew that had ever sold a project, left immediately, but I just kept going into work because it's all my friends were there, in New York, and I had so many friends at this, New Line, and I loved the studio. So
did you sell the second one before the first one was released?
No, it came
So
out.
what the hell was it like whenever you went into work on like a Friday? You're like, I got to leave a little early today, guys. I got a premiere I got to go to.
Yeah, no, it was fun. Like they actually, they had the LA premiere, but I had them throw a premiere for me back in my hometown in Kentucky.
Oh, okay, back in Kentucky.
A town over. We didn't have a. You just had to drive in my town.
Oh, trust me, I'm from the middle of nowhere, Missouri, so I absolutely understand
okay.
that. I was a hillbilly that moved to the city. Like, yes.
Yeah, me too. So yeah, we had in the next city over, we had a Hazard, Kentucky. They had a theater, so they bought out the theater, and we had a premiere back there with all my family and my friends and people I went to school with. So that was amazing.
So how did it develop across time? So whenever you start to when it turns from one movie into a franchise, what happened then? Like how did that evolve, and how did that change your role and your position?
Well, it is funny because I kind of ran into that old, he's a guy that works at a studio that got lucky, so for the sequel, and I always give Craig Perry, like one of the producers, he's been like the godfather of the series as far as like taking care of it and keeping it on track and just being very mindful and stuff like that. But, I wrote a treatment like right away. And it's funny because then I find out that they're meeting with every writer in Hollywood. So at the end of the day, they still ended up buying my treatment for the story. So I'm like, yay. And they hired J. Mackie Gruber and Eric Bress to write the screenplay because they had done The Butterfly Effect for New Line, which was another big hit. And I love the second movie. It's actually my favorite. Because it just kind of, I did all the stuff I'd want to do in a sequel, and not just tell the same story, but expand the mythology. I wanted to start off with a group of kids that you think are the leads and then kill them all off.
Right.
In the highway accident. I originally had written Alex and Clear both to come back in the sequel, but then they killed him off with a brick in between movies because he wasn't available. It was just kind of a stupid thing they did. But it did all the stuff that I wanted to do in a sequel. I think the biggest transition for that one was, again, James Wong and Glenn Morgan came up with the Rube Goldberg aspect of the first film. Because in my original version, since death had kind of screwed up the first time, it had to make the characters commit suicide. So there was a very Nightmare on Elm Street vibe to it where
definitely
death would kind of bring their kind of fears to life, and then they would kill themselves. So it was very dark. It's not a fun final destination.
That sounds awesome. Like I really love that.
I still love it. I still love it, but I can see why the suicide may have been a little heavy.
Right. Yeah, totally.
But then I just readjusted my story for the sequel to fit in with the Rube Goldberg thing and not the suicide thing. And then they made me an executive producer on the second one. So I had, more say on the behind the scenes stuff than I did on the first one. And then after that one, since I quote unquote created it, like I still get like payment whenever they do a new one and stuff like that. But I know the studio and I'm really good friends with Craig. So we bounce ideas off of each other and things like that. But the sequels are fun. I love the fifth one. I thought the fifth one was brilliant because they kind of, I just love the fifth one. But I think they're all fun. For me, I'd love to like do something different with it, because in my mind, like death can have many designs and use different, including suicide, to get people. So, but they really want to, they've got a formula at work. So at this point, it's like, if it's not broke, don't fix it,
Do they consult you at all for anything that comes later on, or are you just kind of like told like this is what we're doing? Craig
usually talks to me and gets my input or some ideas about what's going on. He's very good about doing that. So I know stuff.
But on the second one, they made you an executive producer. So literally sounds like years before that, a year maybe even before that, you're working in an office in New Line Cinema in New York, and then all of a sudden you're an executive producer on a Hollywood film, and that is a big jump. So how did you approach taking that job on, and what were the roles that you've fulfilled as that on the second film?
Well, to be honest, sometimes an executive producer is just somebody who finances the film,
right?
I know for the second movie, I just helped with casting and things like that. I wasn't really, I went to visit set, but I wasn't real. I was more like on the first film, Bob Shea kept me creatively involved, like giving me every draft of the script, asking for notes. And on this one, it was just the producers did that more. It was just like asking me for advice. So it wasn't like I went on set and hired people or which would be more of a producer role.
And it was kind of just keeping you, making sure that you had like the world kind of filtered through you a little bit and making sure that it didn't totally shift in a way that you were uncomfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so then what happened after that for you? Like we're moving forward kind of into your career. You say now you're more into producing, and obviously you've just directed your first feature. How long did it take you to transition into that? And what was it like directing now versus, being a writer and producer? After
Final Destination 2, I mean, I had other movies come out, Tamara, I did the Day of the Dead remake that everybody loves.
Oh, yes.
That's Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead that everybody loves. Everybody hates mine, but that's okay. It's a fun movie. They just shouldn't have called it Day of the Dead.
Right.
And I think what got me more into wanting to produce and take more control of my career is just, I had a lot of films where a studio would option it or a studio would buy it, but then stuff would happen at the studio and then it'd go into turnaround and never get made. Or, a lot of my films ended up, getting taken out of turnaround and getting made for like, under $1 million. So that kind of became a trend after a while. And a lot of the films I loved, and some of them you learn to love all your films at some point. I think the only film that I cringe at is the Return to Cat by the Lake TV movie. That one's, but the thing is, like, the script that I wrote was really good. I'm not just saying that because I've written some shitty scripts. I will say I've written some crappy scripts, but that script was really good. And they actually got Judd Nelson and the director back based on my script. But then the head of USA Networks at the time, and the producer called me one day. She's like, well, we're greenlit to shoot. That's the good news. And I said, oh, great. What's the bad news? And she goes, well, the executive at USA Networks thinks that your script is too clever for their audience. So they're having somebody in-house rewrite it and these are her words, to dumb it down. So they literally went through, like, all the scenes are there in order, but everything's just been like dumbed down. Like, the director who in my original script was like, I didn't want to make him a sleazy director. I wanted to make him like he's dating the lead actress, but he's got all these other actresses trying to like sleep with them to get their bigger parts. And he's like, no, I'm in love with them. And they're like, why doesn't he just sleep with all the actresses? That's what directors would do. And I'm like, because that's stupid and that's cliche. Right. So anyway, he just really dumbed the script down. And so I think the director, I can't speak for him, but he ended up directing it more like a comedy. Because I think he's probably just like, yeah, they screwed the script up. So what the hell? I'm just going to go with the comedy on this one.
What is it like? Like, what is the process like? How do you get a script in their hands? And then what is the process of it getting, optioned and then made? And how are they, I guess, how also are they making the decisions to have somebody else come and rewrite your story that they optioned from you? You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of, that's really interesting that can happen.
Like, I think probably in 3 cases, it was just the timing. Like, I would sell a script and the executive that was really hot on it would be championing it. And then that person would leave to go to another studio. And anytime an executive leaves, it's just kind of common knowledge that the new executive will come in.
They're going to clean house. They're going to dump.
Clean house.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, you can clean house on the bad scripts, but if something's a solid script, you should probably just keep it.
So if that happens to you and your script gets dumped, like because an executive left and it just kind of gets swept out the door, do you get it back then to go sell it somewhere else?
No. That would be too nice. You have to have somebody buy it from the studio.
Wow. So when they option it from you, it's totally just.
If they option it from you, but they usually will buy it.
Okay.
Before Final Destination, it was very much an option, and that still happens on occasion if they're not, depending on the company, if they're confident that they can make it, they'll buy it. But a lot of times they will just option it for like a year and a half or something. So I've had that happen where they've optioned it and sat on it, and then by that time, there was a lot of buzz around it with different studios, but because it didn't get made, then all of a sudden it's like, you can't recreate that buzz, and you can go back and say, hey, the script's available again. And they'll be like, oh, we've got something like it in development. So then you just sell it wherever you can sell it. But if they buy it from you, then if somebody wants it, then they have to kind of pay the studio all the money they put into it. Plus they've added interest onto it. So it ends up becoming like expensive to buy a script back from a studio.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you sell a script to a studio as an idea or as a script, like as a thing, and then they can do whatever they want with it. Basically, it sounds like
after they buy it. Yeah, and it's really it's my frustration with this has always been that script writing is really the only art form where they buy all your rights and can do anything with it.
That's crazy. Like that's insane. Yeah. I mean, that is like, you can't do that anywhere else. Like, how can you buy someone's like script idea, totally change it to a totally different thing and then not have, I mean, that just be okay. That's so weird.
Yeah. Like with a book, you can buy the rights to a book, but you don't take ownership. Like you actually sign the copyright over to the studio when you sell a script. So I don't know if like I'm sure James Cameron doesn't sell the rights to a script, but most of us are never going to be James Cameron. So yeah, they end up buying the copyright, the ownership of your scripts.
Do you have any scripts that you've ever sold, didn't get made, and they're just sitting somewhere and you think it's a fantastic script and you can't get it back, you can't get it bought back, and two, really can't ever rewrite or do something similar with it because it's owned by the studio?
Not really, because the great thing is that you can't copyright a concept. Mm-hmm. So it's all about the execution. So I couldn't go out and like, use like half my script and just change a few things and like sell it somewhere else.
Right.
Like that would get me in trouble. I certainly have taken ideas in scenes from scripts that I've written that I've sold and repurposed them for other films. If there's a set piece that I liked in a script, I can certainly recreate that in a different scenario in another script. So I do that.
So you took everything you learned from kind of writing and this process with the studios, and you turned that into then you becoming a director for Don't Look Back. How was that different for you?
I learned that no matter how many times you've been on sets and watched people direct, it's not the same until you actually do it. I think because I'd been on so many sets and I'd seen so many directors with different directing styles and things like that, I think I knew how important everything was, but I didn't like, time is the biggest thing that you need. Like you need many days, as many days as you can get. But we were really like an indie shoot, so this wasn't like kind of a studio, level shoot. So we were really kind of doing an indie shoot. And
how many days did you end up filming?
A lot.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, but a lot. Yeah. It was, we had a lot of company moves, which were, it was funny because once I got down there and we went down for a month, ahead of time to do pre-production. Once I got down there, I started realizing like, there is no way that we can shoot all these places and do all these things. So I kind of rewrote the script as much as I could, but I was also like rewriting while we were shooting. So it was, it's good to be the writer, but it's also very hectic when it's all of a sudden like we're running behind and we don't
and then you don't have anybody that you can then turn to and be like, hey, can you make them not do this and combine that into another scene? Because then you have to physically sit down and do it while everybody in the world is asking you a question.
Oh yeah, no, there was like one day in particular where it's like I realized there was a scene where like 5 things happened and like I was like, because of what we shot, we could get rid of like 4 of these things. So I need to rewrite this. And they're like, okay, 5 minutes. I'm like, I can't rewrite it in 5 minutes. I'll rewrite it as fast as I can. So I had to like go upstairs and they kept knocking on. Is it rewritten yet? I'm like, guys, go away. Let me rewrite the scene. It was a great learning experience. We had a wonderful team. We had great talent and it was a lot of fun to do. Like it's definitely something I want to do again. I learned a lot about writing while I was doing this. And I also learned about, a lot about just directing because it was almost like we were doing it guerrilla style, which I think I needed for my first film, because I think if I'd have got spoiled with a $5 million budget, then I wouldn't have learned as much as I had learned on this project. So
this was also based on like a short film that you guys did, like, right, called The Good Samaritan. And
yeah.
So, and that is pretty different, the short film, from the trailer. So what morphed? Why did you make the short film? Did that help you get it sold? Like, not sold, but that help you get the financing together to make it? And then how did that morph into a feature film?
When I did the short, I decided that I was going to take a character from the short and expand his storyline and make it straight up kind of supernatural, but you just don't know if it's real or in his head. So the short is definitely more horror focused. and the movie is more suspense, like mystery with horror in it.
Okay.
So that was the biggest difference.
Gotcha. So it sounds like they're kind of two different pieces that share a similarity of concept.
Yeah. They share the concept of, not watching. And in the original feature, Nathan was agoraphobic, one of the characters in the film. So that's why he didn't help. So I used that. But when we were doing the film, we couldn't find any locations where we could find a building overlooking the park. And then it just felt too weird. So we just have him actually at the park now. So the agoraphobic stuff is gone.
So now whenever you actually physically got there, is that going to change your writing style moving forward?
It was funny. I realized, like, in the script, like the lead character, her name's Caitlin Kramer, and she and some people witness somebody being assaulted and don't help. And then something starts coming after them. Like the guy that gets assaulted dies. And so then they're outed to the public and somebody starts coming after them. And a couple of funny things, like in the script, I realized once we were shooting like that, I had her boyfriend bringing her food a lot. His name's Josh, and he would come in with Chinese takeout, or he'd be cooking, or and I was like, wow, and we shot all the scenes in the house in 1 week. So I'm like, oh shit, he's like, every time he's come in the house, he's got food with him. So, I ended up like changing that. And so it's things like that and transitions too. Like you can always end a scene on something like a dramatic line, but that doesn't tell you like how does that scene transition into the next scene? Like, cause when you're reading the script, it's like dramatic line, cut to next location. We're on a character sitting at a table, but visually that's not a transitional kind of thing. So it's got me thinking more about transitions. Yeah, when I started writing, I remember when I wrote the first draft of Final Destination, Craig Perry sent it back to me, and he'd marked out so much of it, quit directing. Because I would have, like, we come into the room and see this, and I was directing the movie. And then I learned very quickly that as a writer, you're not supposed to write like that.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So if I assume you're probably going to, well, let me ask you, are you going to direct again? Is that like an ambition you still have after Dunning once, or did it burn you out and you're like, I'm going back to writing?
No, I have like a couple of projects that I want to direct. Like there's one that I've sat on for a long time that I tried to sell it before, but it involves it's very Stephen King-ish in Nightmare on Elm Street, and every place that wanted to buy it wanted to make them all teenagers. And I'm like, no. So that one I'm going to definitely direct. And there's a couple projects that I want to direct. It's interesting because people tell me, like, after you direct the first time, you're going to either hate it or love it. You'll know, like, and so I definitely didn't leave the process saying I don't want to direct. I don't want to become like a director full time. Like I have certain stories of mine that I want to direct and tell. And then also I have scripts that friends of mine have written that I think are great that I want to help them get made. So
kind of moving into producing, directing, writing, just kind of all over, just handling all of the aspects, it sounds like.
Yeah. The good news is with how the business has changed now, there are a lot more production companies like this. We have our major studios, but there are so many other production companies out there. There's so many places looking for content. Obviously, having something on DVD or premiering on Netflix or Amazon is not a dirty word anymore. I mean, they have huge stars in a lot of their stuff. So there are so many more avenues to get your work out there than there were when I was starting. There's so many more opportunities out there than there were when I started off. So you just have to kind of be on top of what's going on and who's doing what.
Absolutely. It all comes down to story, right? I mean, everything comes back to story.
Yeah.
For Don't Look Back, though, what's the next plan? Where is it going? Where can people find it? And what's your distribution look like for it?
It's coming out in fall. We'll be announcing the date pretty soon. And I don't know if this is going to happen. We had originally planned for like a 10-city limited release, like a week, I think, leading up to the film coming out on demand.
Was that with the distributor, or were you guys just four-walling stuff like you're doing here?
The distributor was going to do that.
Let me just ask this question. How did you get connected to your distributor?
Well, my producer, Andrew Vandenhouten, he does a lot of distribution himself. So he's very connected in that world. And we just, when the film was done, we sent it out to people that I knew at studios and production companies that I knew. He he knows pretty much everybody. So he kind of just sent it out to everybody. And then we just settled on the place that kind of offered us the best deal, which was like a limited theatrical, and, on demand So it was cool, you know.
And is that your overall strategy? Was it the strategy from beginning probably to hit like TVOD or, you know, SVOD, AVOD to try and make the money back?
Obviously, when you make something, your first thing is you want to see your movie in a theater, you know, it's just like, you just want to. But, you know, as we went through the process, I mean, the film is really good, but it's not easy to categorize because you can't say it's a horror film. And I used to hate films that were like, oh, we're not really a horror film. I'm not saying that at all. Like, but the one I chose to do wasn't a straight up horror film because, you know, we couldn't show too much with the kills because you don't know if it's supernatural or an actual physical killer. So we couldn't show anybody running around stabbing somebody with a knife or strangling somebody. And you know, so it kind of fell in between genres. So that ended up being a little tough, you know, with the studios because we don't have any like A-list stars in our movie. We have a great cast. They're amazing. I'm very excited for y'all to see their work. But, you know, since from a sales point, we didn't have any A-list cast members. They're like, well, this isn't really horror, so we can't sell it as a genre film. So we need the name because it's more of a mystery thriller. Mm-hmm. So that turned into like the kind of double-edged sword that I kind of knew going in, but yeah, at first our plan was to have a $5 million budget and throw a couple of big names in there that can go on the poster and draw people in. Yeah. But now it's just this, it's going to have to rely on the story and, you know, back to story, you know, I wanted to start like promoting it now because I'm like, October's not that far, but you know, the distributors are like, well, we usually wait till more to like September. I'm like, okay. Feels like it's cutting it close to me, but okay. Well,
overall to have a film that gets made, first of all, that is a first time director and that has distribution in place is already a very, very, very big step.
Yes.
What do you think you would say to young people that are either screenwriters or young filmmakers or people that are starting to make their first film? Like, what have you learned along the way that you wish you knew when you started off?
I think a couple of key things are you had to be patient because it takes time. Like, you know, I hate all these cliches, but they're all true. There's no overnight successes. We'll focus on that one person who was like this wonderkind who sold a script at 20 for like, you know, and then aim for that. And we don't realize the thousands and thousands of people that come to LA or go try to get stuff made every year that can't get things made. So you really have to stay patient. You know, the rule is kind of, you have to be willing to dedicate 10 years of your life to this craft and focusing on it before you start finding success. And that means finding work. That doesn't mean becoming like a millionaire and having a mansion. And I think that rule is because this has to be your passion. If this is, I meet too many people who are like, well, I'm going to write a movie. And if nothing happens, then I'm going to go sell, you know, insurance. It's like, well, just go sell insurance. Like, if you're just doing this as like a hobby, it's not right for you. Be open to constructive criticism. Cause I find a lot of people especially when they're younger, myself included, was a little cocky about taking criticism. And that hindered me a lot from growing as an artist. Surround yourself with good people. That's the biggest thing. You'll find a lot in any business, you'll find a lot of shady people, but I always joke in the film business, like if somebody has a chance to get a movie made, they will throw their mother in front of a bus. A lot of people will, to get a movie made. And you'll find that in a lot of your colleagues and friends. Like they will go around you. They'll do stuff to undermine, you know, you just have to surround yourself with good people. Make your own content if you can. I think that now, because there's so many outlets out there that will view content or you can get content on. I have friends that have done shorts that have ended up on Amazon, you know, and on Amazon Prime. And so it's like you can get a short or do a feature. You know, when you meet people that you really vibe with, you know, and connect with, like stick with those people. Like those are the people that, you know, I think you build the longest creative relationships with, because it's such a small business. Like my first AD on Don't Look Back ended up working on like as a first AD on the short of my best friend was working on, like 2 months after we finished. And I never introduced them. Like they just met through somebody completely different. And then I found out there were, you know, it's just a small business. You don't have to be in LA, you know, to find work. There's like great film communities like in, you know, Louisiana, you know, Florida's got a good one. Texas is building up really well. It has a really solid one. Atlanta, obviously. there are film communities all around the United States, and there's film communities in every state too. So, and also networking in a smart way. Like especially if you're a writer, I always tell people to pick a genre. I know we like to show how creative we are and we can do everything, but you have to think of this as a business. And because there are so many people, my old boss, Robert Friedman, said, you have to cut through the clutter. Like there's so many people coming to LA every day to be actors, to be writers, to be directors, to be producers, to be some of them every day they're coming. And so you have to be in it for the long game and figure out how to cut through the clutter. So if you're a writer, it's like pick a genre, because, if you sell a horror script, everybody's going to want your next horror script. You can say, I've got this great comedy. They're going to be like, yeah, let me see your horror script, because it takes time. Like Chris Nolan had to do 2 Batman movies, not just one. He had to do two Batman movies before they'd let him do Inception. Like he originally thought after the first one, okay. And they're like, well, we'll finance Inception, but you got to do one more Batman movie for us. So it's just realize that the business side of it is a business, and it's cruel because as artists, like we put so much of our heart and soul into our work. Mm-hmm. It's a cruel business in that they don't care about your heart and soul. They care about, is this movie going to make money? Is this TV show going to get viewers?
And it makes sense in a way, because whenever you look at their lineup every year, I mean, every distributor is trying to make money. That's the whole point, right? And it's a damn hard business to make money in. So I get it. Like that absolutely makes sense. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head a second ago whenever you were saying, it's not really a horror movie. So it's more of a thriller, but we don't have an A-list name in it. So it's kind of there. Everybody's kind of pushing back on it. I was like, I feel like every idea I've ever come up with is like, yeah, but it's this plus this and meets this. And it's just kind of like, that's such good advice to be like, just pick a lane, especially in the beginning, and just go down the lane.
Yeah. It's a smart business move, because in that way, if you look at it like if I could direct, or if I could write, or if I could act in a certain genre for 10 years, pick something that you'd be happy doing. So that, yes, if you sell a horror script, if you sell a comedy, if you direct a horror movie or you direct a comedy, like pick something that's going to make you happy, because that's the lane you want to focus on. You can make a brand, create your own brand in that space, because when people think of horror, when people think of me, I should say, they think of horror. The other way sounded way too sheer. When they think of me, they think of horror. It's funny because every time I say horror in a series, she writes out horror. So I don't know if I'm saying horror wrong, if I'm just saying it too fast, but Sierra Rose writes horror. I'm like, no, not horror, horror.
It's a hard one to get around, that middle R.
Yeah. I got to work on that one. Every time I almost hit messages, I'm like, ooh.
Well, if you ever write something for yourself to act in, just avoid that word, like the plague. Like it's that type of movie which has a lot of jumps, and people are generally afraid. Popcorn gets spilled everywhere a lot. I can't remember what it's called. Make somebody else say it to you.
And then I'll go, horror. I'll just do like a Stewie Griffin and be like, horror.
Well, Jeffrey, it's been wonderful to get to talk to you. And thank you so much for sharing your time and your advice and all the stories.
Thanks, Steven. And it was great being here. And, again, we're artists and we're sensitive. We have to realize, like, again, a lot of the people that are when it comes to putting up money for stuff, they don't understand. Like, they don't understand, like, that a brief, an actor will come in for an audition and they've prepped for like a week and they memorized all their lines and they leave. And then one of the producers is like, she looks like my ex, boyfriend, or some guy's like, he looks like my ex-boyfriend, or we don't want to use him. And it's like, that has nothing to do with the person's talent. It's just a stupid thing that gets in some producer's craw, and then they don't cast somebody. Like, so once you know that, like that it's not about your value as an artist and it's not about you, it'll hopefully not crush you, but it'll also just inspire you to go out and kind of make your own art. You never know if you put your passion out there, you never know who's going to see it and what it's going to lead to. But if you sit at home and procrastinate or just think about it and don't actually do it, then nobody's ever going to see it. So just think about it that way. Just put your art out there and it'll eventually get seen by somebody who needs to see it.
Okay, so I was one of those teenagers that saw Final Destination in the movie theaters. I don't know that I'm in a, promo where we're all screaming or whatever, but I definitely saw that movie in the movie theaters, like a date night style, slasher film to go see.
Of course you did. Of course. I'd be surprised if you've not seen all of those movies.
What I really love about him is how nice of a guy he is, first off, how genuine of a person. Yeah.
No ego whatsoever. That, like, all this success has done all of this, and he's just a normal guy, like just straight up great.
That's something that I kind of like about his story. He said it's a little bit different, that he didn't immediately get this big success and then move to LA and change his whole life and change everything about his life. He kind of went what would be different for most people who get a big Hollywood success like that. He got that success and then he kept working at his other job, and he, kind of kept slowly moving forward. I kind of respect that in a lot of ways. And I think that ultimately, he joked that maybe he should have done it differently, but I don't know, I do think there's something to that. And I do think it's interesting. And I do think that keeping it straight and narrow and walking the line and staying on course rather than changing your whole lifestyle when you get a big success. I think there's something to that.
I mean, he did say straight up, dedicate 10 years to this. Like, you know what I mean? If it's in one genre, that was something really to take away was, be patient, stay in a lane, like pick what you want to do and do that, because that's what you should dedicate your time to. And that is such good advice.
And he seemed very easy to work with. When we say no ego, it really felt like he carries that type of thing into his writing, where he would say he would have this idea and then his co-writer would say, what about this idea? And he would be ready to change it, and not hold on too tightly to change or to criticism or to, suggestions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it also just proves, how tenacious you have to be, because he has an interesting mix of tenacity, but no ego, but humbleness, so he has a way of just kind of feeling like he's driving always at something without judging the thing or the people around him. Like he's just kind of always poking at it. And that's very inspiring to see somebody be able to do that.
I can't wait to see his directorial debut, Don't Look Back. Another movie with Jeremy Holm, right?
Another movie with Jeremy Holm. And you can't, honestly, you can't discount that how hard it is, even for a person at his stage in his career, to direct your first film, to get funding, to put it out there and get it made. It's super hard. I think it did not make it any easier on him because he had to write and direct it. That, when things changed, he didn't have anyone to have his back to help, amend it and pare things down.
Absolutely. Well, I know I sound a little bit like a broken record on this, but I'm going to kind of repeat one of the same things I say in a lot of these wrap-ups, which is this idea that it's going to be easier when you get to a certain stage, right? Everyone, I think, always kind of thinks that it's going to be different when I get to this stage. When I'm making a movie with this budget, I won't have to deal with these problems. I won't have to deal with this. And I think what we continue to hear, especially with independent filmmaking, is many of those same problems, many of those same challenges are going to be the things you deal with despite the budget, despite the crew size. You're always dealing with those type of problems and challenges: budget, time, money, daylight, and moving crew and cast around.
He said he hit on one of my favorite statements in there. The one thing you can't get back and with you can't fix in production is time. Like, you always need more time. Like, and so, yeah, you're exactly right. And he also said at the end there, the list of takeaways for him, and his advice was very good. Be tenacious, be patient, stay in your lane, find people that compliment you, that you like working with, and stick with them. And I think that's great advice.
Filmmaking is a collaborative experience, and so is this podcast. Follow us on Instagram at framework_productions for upcoming episode announcements, and leave your questions in the comments for our future guests. The first 10 to comment are immediately entered to win a monthly prize. Please take a second to subscribe so you know about future episodes, and leave a review. It really does help us. For more information about today's guest, visit independentfilmmakersguide.com to see visuals, diagrams, and to see links to the episode in video and article form. IFG is a community, and we want to help you in your filmmaking process.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Abel. I'm an actor from New York, and I'll be reading the credits. IFG is created by Framework Productions, and it's directed by James Allerdyce. Produced by Matt Mundy, edited by Audrey Rae McHale, and hosted by Stephen Pierce. The music is by Glassboard. You can find his music on freemusicarchive.org.
Hey friends, we just wanted to take a quick moment to talk about two personal things. First, we wanted to thank you, our listening community, and our wonderful guests, learning so much together along the way and continuing to learn, sharing our stories, making a lot of new friends, and collaborating, which is exactly what this is all about. Which also brings me to my second point. In great part to many of these new relationships, we wanted to let you know that we've taken a lot of this advice ourselves and made our own narrative feature film, Herd, H-E-R-D, Herd, which is premiering this October on Friday the 13th in select theaters as well as on VOD. Personally, I think it's the perfect kind of scary movie to watch during our favorite scary season. So we'd love for you to celebrate with us and watch Herd. You can pre-order it on Apple TV and, of course, do the communal thing, see it in theaters. Of course, for all of this, please see our show notes, but basically, we're going to keep it all updated at herd.film. That's HERD.FILM, herd.film as well. Thank you again. And be sure to give us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts so we can continue to build this community and collaborate. IFG, how movies get made.